This is the story of a billionaire's heiress who was dying fast. Doctors failed until the maid uncovered a shocking hidden truth that no one expected. But how could a simple maid see what world-class doctors missed? And why did her discovery shake an entire system built on power and money? Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how the most unlikely person saved a life, exposed corruption, and gave a little girl a second chance at childhood. Richard Langston was a man the world admired. Billionaire investor, sharp mind, flawless suits, and the kind of power that made governments listen when he spoke. But behind the tall gates of his marble mansion, Richard faced something no amount of wealth could control. His only daughter, Luna, was slipping away. She was just 10 years old, fragile as glass. Once full of energy and laughter, she now spent most days in a dimly lit bedroom, her tiny body weakened by a mysterious illness. Doctors had no clear answers. Specialists flew in from across the globe: London, Geneva, New York. Each one carried confidence in their voices and thick folders of test results. Yet none could stop her decline. Richard's life, once about profit margins and global deals, narrowed to the quiet sound of his daughter's shallow breathing. He signed checks without question. Millions flowed to hospitals, research labs, experimental treatments. If money could buy life, he was certain he could purchase more time for his child. But week by week, Luna grew paler, thinner, and weaker. The mansion became heavy with silence. The staff walked quietly, speaking in hushed tones. Nurses rotated in and out, their expressions carefully blank. Every corner of the house seemed haunted by Richard's fear. And yet, life has a way of bringing answers from unexpected places. That answer arrived one morning in the form of a young woman with a modest suitcase and calm eyes: Julia. She wasn't hired as a doctor or even as a specialized nurse. She came recommended by a family friend as someone trustworthy, someone good with children. Richard barely noticed her arrival. To him, she was just another member of the household staff. A maid, someone to keep order, make meals, and stay out of the way. But Julia noticed things others didn't. On her first day, she was shown to her small quarters near the back of the mansion. From her window, she could see the sprawling garden where Luna used to play. She was told the child no longer had the strength to go outside. That night, while arranging linens in the hallway, Julia overheard muffled voices through Luna's door. Doctors discussing charts, arguing in whispers about medication dosages. Their words were heavy with medical jargon, but Julia caught the tension in their tones. Something wasn't right. When she finally met Luna, Julia's heart broke. The little girl was sitting propped against pillows, eyes too big for her thin face, clutching a sketchbook with trembling fingers. Despite her frailty, she managed a small smile when Julia introduced herself. "Do you like to draw?" Julia asked gently. Luna nodded and opened the book. Inside were shaky but vibrant pictures of gardens, swings, and a tall figure holding a child's hand. Julia realized the drawings were memories of better days. From that moment, something shifted. Julia didn't just see an employer's daughter. She saw a child in pain, desperate for comfort. But Richard remained distant. He was consumed with meetings with doctors, reviewing endless test results, and authorizing new experimental treatments. His once confident posture was crumbling under the weight of helplessness, but he never let himself admit it aloud. As days passed, Julia became a quiet presence in Luna's life. She read to her at night, helped her sit by the window for fresh air, and most importantly, she listened. Luna confided small things: how the medicines made her stomach hurt, how she sometimes felt worse after the treatments than before. These details barely reached Richard's ears. He trusted the doctors too much, too blindly. But Julia, though, kept every word tucked away in her mind. The more she observed, the more unsettled she became. Why was Luna being given so many medications, sometimes more than once a day? Why did the doctors argue when they thought no one was listening? Why did Luna improve slightly whenever a dose was missed or delayed? Julia didn't speak up yet. She was just a maid in the eyes of Richard and the medical team. But inside, she carried a growing sense of unease. She knew something was wrong. And she knew she couldn't stay silent forever.
The days stretched into weeks, and the Langston mansion, once alive with guests and laughter, became more like a private hospital. Medical staff came and went in quiet rotation, white coats trailing down endless hallways. Machines hummed and beeped in Luna's room, monitoring every heartbeat, every breath, as though numbers could somehow hold on to our life. Richard buried himself in the only thing he knew how to do: control what he could. He wrote checks without hesitation. He demanded progress reports twice a day. He ordered the best specialists from across the globe, promising blank checks to anyone who could cure his daughter. But the results were always the same. Luna's condition worsened. At first, the doctors spoke in hopeful tones. "We're adjusting the dosage. Her body just needs more time to respond. This treatment has worked in other cases." But over time, their language shifted. Hopeful words turned to hedged phrases. "We're still running tests. It's complicated. There are risks with pulling back now." Richard grew more desperate, but he clung to their words. After all, these were the brightest minds money could buy. If he questioned them, what would that say about his judgment? Meanwhile, Julia quietly watched. She wasn't a doctor, but she was observant. She noticed how Luna seemed weaker on the days after a new treatment was introduced, how her cheeks flushed unnaturally after some medications but turned ghostly pale after others. She noticed the way Luna would wince and whisper, "It burns," though no one seemed to take her seriously. Julia started keeping a private notebook. She wasn't sure why at first, maybe just instinct, but each day she scribbled notes about Luna's symptoms, her reactions, and the medications she saw being administered. She wrote down times, dosages, and even the subtle changes in Luna's mood. The more she wrote, the clearer the pattern became. Whenever Luna's medication schedule was disrupted, like the night one nurse forgot a dose, or the morning a shipment was delayed, her condition seemed to slightly improve. She smiled more. She asked for food. She even laughed once, a sound so rare in the house that Julia nearly cried hearing it. But when the treatments resumed on schedule, Luna slid back into weakness, her tiny body trembling with exhaustion. Julia's heart raced as she pieced it together. Could it really be the medicine itself? She told herself she might be wrong. After all, what did she know compared to doctors with years of training? And yet, her instincts screamed otherwise. Richard, meanwhile, was unraveling. In the past, he had always appeared unshakable, a titan of industry, a man who thrived on risk and always came out ahead. But now, sitting outside his daughter's room at midnight, head in his hands, he looked like any other father. His wealth meant nothing here. He replayed every decision in his head, questioning if he had acted too late, trusted the wrong people, ignored signs he should have seen. He rarely spoke to Julia beyond short instructions. In his eyes, she was still just the maid, someone who couldn't possibly understand the burden he carried. But Julia understood more than he realized. One night, after the doctors left, Julia found Richard standing alone by the window, staring out at the city lights. His reflection in the glass looked older than his years. "Mr. Langston," she said softly, unsure if he even wanted to hear her voice. He didn't turn. "You can go to bed. I'll stay here." Julia hesitated, then gathered her courage. "Sir, have you noticed that Luna sometimes feels better when the treatments are delayed?" His shoulders stiffened. Slowly he turned to face her, his eyes sharp. "What are you implying?" "I don't know, Mr. Langston. I'm not a doctor, but I've kept notes, and it seems like the medicine may be hurting her more than helping." Richard's expression hardened. "Do you realize what you're saying? These are the finest specialists in the world. You think you've seen something they've missed?" Julia lowered her gaze. I think we should question everything, for Luna's sake." The silence stretched heavy between them. Finally, Richard shook his head, dismissing her words with a wave of his hand. "Don't speak of this again. You don't understand the risks." Julia nodded quietly, but inside her resolve only grew stronger. If the doctors and even Richard were too blinded by authority to see the truth, then it was up to her. And so she began digging deeper. She discreetly checked medication labels left behind in the trash. She searched the internet late at night on her small phone, trying to match the names of drugs with their side effects. And what she found terrified her. Some of the medications were experimental, barely tested, and known to cause severe complications in children. The doctors weren't healing Luna, they were experimenting on her. Julia's hands shook as she realized the weight of it. This wasn't just about Luna anymore. If these treatments were being pushed by powerful doctors, how many other children were suffering? But she couldn't run to Richard yet. He wouldn't believe her, not without proof. And proof was exactly what she intended to find.
Julia barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, images of Luna's pale face haunted her. The little girl's weak smile, the trembling of her hands, the way her voice cracked when she whispered, "It hurts." Julia's instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. And if the doctors or even Richard wouldn't see it, then she had to. She knew she was just the maid, but she was also the only one paying attention. It started with little things. Julia noticed how nurses sometimes rushed through Luna's treatments, almost mechanical, as if following an order they didn't dare question. The vials they carried looked clinical, labels in bold letters, but the names meant nothing to her. Still, Julia wrote each one down in her notebook. Every night, when the mansion quieted, she'd pull out her old phone and search the names online. She scrolled through medical journals, blogs, and even parent forums where desperate families shared stories. That's when she saw it. Reports of compassionate use trials, experimental drugs tested on terminal patients with little oversight. Parents wrote of children who got worse, not better. Stories eerily similar to Luna's. Julia's stomach twisted. Could the world's best doctors really be using Luna as a test subject without Richard realizing it? Richard, meanwhile, clung to his belief that money bought solutions. When Julia once again tried to gently mention her concerns, he snapped. "Julia, enough! You don't understand the medical world. These doctors have saved countless lives. Do you really think you, someone with no degree, no experience, can see something they don't?" Julia swallowed her frustration. "Sir, I'm only asking you to look closer." But Richard waved her off, consumed with conference calls with specialists and signing off on new rounds of treatments. He couldn't face the possibility that all his efforts might be hurting his daughter. It was too painful, too unthinkable. One night, Julia slipped quietly into the supply room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with medication boxes and vials. She carefully pulled one down, her hands trembling. The label bore a long chemical name she couldn't pronounce. She snapped a photo with her phone. Later, cross-referencing it online, her fears were confirmed. The drug wasn't FDA approved. It was still in experimental trial stages, known to cause organ failure in pediatric patients. Julia's breath caught in her throat. They weren't treating Luna. They were poisoning her. She slammed the phone shut, her heart racing. The truth was bigger than she imagined. If she stayed silent, Luna would die. But if she spoke up without proof, she risked being silenced, or worse, fired, and cut off from protecting Luna. The next morning, Julia stood outside Luna's room as a doctor prepared another injection. She couldn't hold back anymore. "Wait," Julia said firmly. The nurse froze, startled. The doctor frowned. "Excuse me? You can't give her that, not again." Richard, who had just entered, looked furious. "Julia, what is the meaning of this?" Julia's hands shook, but her voice didn't. "That drug is experimental. It's not saving her, it's killing her." Gasps filled the room. The doctor stiffened. "This is highly inappropriate. You have no right." "No right," Julia snapped, stepping closer. "Then why does she improve every time a dose is missed? Why do her symptoms line up with the documented side effects? I've kept notes. I've done my research. You're not curing her. You're using her." Richard's face turned pale, torn between disbelief and fear. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The doctor's professional mask slipped for just a second. "Mr. Langston, these treatments are her only chance. Without them, she might actually live," Julia cried, pointing to Luna's trembling hands. The room erupted in chaos. Richard ordered everyone out, leaving only himself, Julia, and Luna behind. His mind was spinning. That night, Richard confronted the lead doctor privately. "Tell me the truth. Are these drugs approved?" "They are part of a trial, yes, but Mr. Langston, this is cutting-edge science. You wanted the best, and this is it." Richard's jaw tightened. "You didn't tell me it was experimental? You signed the consent forms. Every treatment carries risk." Richard's world tilted. The papers he had signed in desperation, the jargon he hadn't understood, had they tricked him? Or had he been too blinded by hope to see the truth? When he returned to Luna's room, Julia was sitting by her bedside, holding the girl's hand. Luna was sleeping peacefully, free of medication for the first time in days. Her breathing sounded steadier. Richard's chest ached. For the first time, he allowed himself to think, what if Julia is right? Over the following days, Julia doubled down. She secretly copied medication logs, photographed documents left unattended, and even recorded conversations where doctors admitted the drugs were part of trials. Her notebook became her weapon. Dates, times, symptoms matched against the medications. One evening, as she flipped through her notes, Richard entered quietly. Instead of brushing past her, he asked, "May I see?" She froze. Then slowly, she handed the notebook over. Richard sat down, scanning the pages. Line after line, detail after detail, the evidence was damning. He looked up, his eyes wet. "Oh my God, what have I done?" Julia placed a hand on his arm. "You were trying to save her, but now we know the truth, and we can stop it." For the first time, Richard didn't see Julia as a maid. He saw her as an ally. The next morning, Richard confronted the doctors in front of his staff. His voice thundered through the halls of the mansion. "You told me you could save my daughter. Instead, you experimented on her. You gambled with her life." The doctor stammered excuses, but Richard's fury was unstoppable. "This ends now. Pack your things. You're finished here." Julia stood silently beside him, her notebook clutched tightly. She knew this was only the beginning. The truth needed to come out, not just for Luna, but for every child these doctors endangered. And Richard, once a man who thought money could buy everything, now realized the cost of blind trust. Together, he and Julia prepared for the battle ahead. A battle that would take them far beyond the mansion walls, into the courtroom, where power, lies, and truth would finally collide.
The polished oak doors of the courthouse swung open, and Richard Langston, once untouchable in his wealth and pride, stepped inside with Julia at his side. For the first time in his life, he wasn't here to sign contracts or close deals. He was here as a father, fighting for his daughter's life. News cameras flashed. Reporters crowded near the steps, shouting questions. "Mr. Langston, is it true your daughter was used in illegal drug trials? Who is this woman with you? Is she your maid?" Richard ignored them, jaw clenched. Julia, though terrified, kept her head high. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was the one who had uncovered the truth, and she was ready to stand for it. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. On one side sat Richard and Julia with their small legal team. On the other, a wall of expensive lawyers representing the doctors and the powerful pharmaceutical company backing them. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "Mr. Langston," the opposing attorney began smoothly, "with all due respect, you consented to these treatments. You signed every form. You wanted aggressive intervention, and that's what our clients provided." Richard's fists tightened on the table. "I signed under the belief they were safe. You told me these were proven treatments. You didn't tell me you were experimenting on my child." The lawyer smirked. "We gave you hope, Mr. Langston, and you accepted it." Julia couldn't stay silent. She rose, her voice trembling but clear. "Hope is not the same as deception. I saw what those drugs did to Luna. I kept records, and I can prove they weren't helping her, they were killing her." The judge raised a brow. "And you are—" she said, standing tall. "Julia Reyes. I'm the Langston family maid. But I was the only one who stayed by Luna's side long enough to notice the truth." Murmurs rippled through the room. A maid challenging doctors? It sounded absurd, but her courage held steady. Julia opened her worn notebook. Page after page of dates, dosages, symptoms. She laid it on the evidence table. Then she played the recordings, voices of doctors casually discussing trial outcomes and side effects tolerated within parameters. The courtroom gasped. The opposing lawyer pounced. "Your Honor, this is anecdotal at best. A maid's diary and illegally obtained recordings? This is not science, it's emotion." But Richard stood, his voice booming. "It's truth, and I'll stake everything I have to make sure it's heard."
For the first time, Julia saw him not as a billionaire protecting his pride, but as a father protecting his child. The doctors were called to the stand. One by one, they dodged questions, hiding behind jargon. But cracks began to show. Under pressure, one admitted that the treatments were part of an experimental study. Another confessed that side effects were expected. Julia's hands shook as she listened. These were the men Richard had trusted, the men he had paid millions, and they had gambled with a child's life. When it was Julia's turn to testify, she told the story from the beginning. The first signs of Luna's illness, the worsening after each treatment, the improvements during delays. Her words weren't polished, but they were raw and human. "I may not have a degree," she said, looking directly at the judge, "but I had something those doctors didn't. I was there. I saw her. I listened to her, and I loved her enough to notice what they ignored." The courtroom fell silent. Even the opposing attorneys had no quick retort. Richard was the final witness. He admitted his mistakes openly. "I thought money could buy my daughter's life. I trusted these doctors blindly. But it took Julia, someone I overlooked, someone I dismissed, to show me the truth. Without her, Luna would already be gone." His voice cracked. "I failed as a father, but I will not fail again." For once, Richard Langston, the billionaire titan, looked vulnerable, and that vulnerability carried more weight than any legal argument. After hours of testimony, the judge delivered his decision. These treatments were administered without full transparency. Consent obtained through omission is not true consent. Therefore, the court rules in favor of Mr. Langston and his daughter. The pharmaceutical company and its representatives are to cease all experimental procedures immediately and will be investigated for malpractice. The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted. Julia gasped, tears streaming down her face. Richard placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. For the first time, it wasn't the hand of a master to a maid. It was the hand of a father to an ally, a man humbled by the courage of someone he once thought invisible. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again. This time, Richard stopped. "If you want to know the hero of this story," he said into the microphones, "don't look at me. Look at her." He gestured to Julia. "She saved my daughter's life." Julia froze, stunned as cameras turned toward her. For once, the world saw her, not as a maid, but as a voice of truth. Back at the mansion, Luna's treatments were stopped. Slowly, her strength returned. Color bloomed in her cheeks. She laughed again, a sound like sunlight breaking through storm clouds.
The trial was over. The gavel had fallen, the verdict delivered, and the truth finally laid bare for the world to see. When Julia and Richard stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter somehow. For months, they had lived in a storm of fear, doubt, and lies. Now, for the first time, the clouds had cleared. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, families hugged one another. But Julia and Richard said nothing. They just exchanged a quiet look, the kind of look shared between two people who had survived something no one else could fully understand. Back at the Langston mansion, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What once felt like a hollow palace of silence now felt alive with warmth. Luna was in the garden again, her frail frame wrapped in a blanket, sketchbook balanced on her lap. She wasn't the weak, fading girl she had been just months before. Her cheeks had color again, her laughter carried across the yard, and her eyes sparkled with a light Julia hadn't seen in years.
Richard watched from the balcony, his arms crossed. But this time, it wasn't distance keeping him away. It was awe. "Julia," he said quietly, "you've given me my daughter back, and you've given me something I thought I lost years ago. Hope." Julia smiled softly. "She did the hard part. She fought. We just stood beside her." Richard shook his head. "No, you stood when I didn't. That makes all the difference." The months passed, and life began to look astonishingly normal. Richard enrolled Luna in a local school. Julia packed her lunches, helped braid her hair, and walked her to the door each morning. Richard drove her on her first day, his nervousness almost greater than hers. Luna had been isolated for so long that the idea of sitting in a classroom terrified her. But to everyone's surprise, she adapted quickly. Children welcomed her, teachers praised her talent in art. Her notebooks filled with color, scenes of gardens, families holding hands, and dreams that stretched beyond hospital walls. Julia often found herself tearing up when she looked at those drawings. Each one was a reminder of how far Luna had come. During the third day of the trial, Luna had been kept at home to protect her from the chaos. But one of her simple drawings had been shown as evidence. A bald little girl standing between two adults, smiling, with the words, "I feel safe now," written underneath. That single drawing had moved a courtroom full of strangers to tears, and now Luna's art continued to speak louder than words ever could. She joined a small school art club, entering competitions and winning little ribbons. But more importantly, she was finding her voice, the voice of a girl who once couldn't speak above a whisper. As time passed, Luna's story spread quietly beyond her school. A counselor nominated her for a national award for courage. At the ceremony, Luna walked on stage, hair grown out slightly, metal glinting under the lights. She smiled at the crowd as cameras flashed. "Strength," she said into the microphone, "doesn't just come from medicine. Mine came from love, and sometimes that's stronger than anything else." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply. Julia sat in the audience with tears streaming down her cheeks, Richard beside her clapping harder than anyone. Soon, letters began arriving at the mansion. Children from across the country wrote to Luna, sharing their own battles, illness, fear, loneliness. Many said her story gave them courage to keep fighting. Julia often read them aloud at night while Luna listened, eyes wide with wonder. "They think I'm brave," Luna whispered once, "but really, I was just scared." Julia kissed her forehead. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Luna. It means you keep going anyway." One afternoon, Julia attended what she thought was a routine school assembly. But when she entered the hall, she saw Luna standing nervously on stage, holding an envelope. A woman from child services stood beside her. The audience quieted. Luna's simple voice echoed through the microphone. "Julia has always been more than someone who cared for me. She's my mother in every way that matters." The woman announced, "From today, Julia Reyes is officially Luna Langston's adoptive mother." Julia gasped, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She ran to the stage, embracing Luna tightly. The room erupted in applause. Teachers crying, students cheering. For Julia, it was the moment her life changed forever. She wasn't just the maid who had saved a child, she was a mother. Years passed quickly. Luna grew into a teenager, then a young woman. Her passion for art only deepened. Richard transformed a sunny room in the mansion into her personal studio, walls lined with canvases, jars of brushes, and shelves overflowing with paints. Julia often found Luna there, lost in her work, pouring her heart into every stroke. By the time she graduated, Luna had earned a scholarship to a prestigious art school. Saying goodbye was bittersweet. Julia helped her pack. Richard drove her to campus. They both hugged her tightly, reluctant to let go. "Go share your gift," Julia whispered. "The world needs your light." Years later, invitations arrived in the mail. Luna was hosting her first professional art exhibition. At the gallery, white walls displayed her journey. Dark, painful images of hospital beds and lonely nights contrasted with vibrant scenes of gardens, hands holding, and beams of light breaking through clouds. Each painting told a piece of her story: fear, survival, and love. That night, Luna stood before the crowd. Her voice was clear, her presence strong. People think my strength came from medicine, but the truth is, my first strength came from Julia's heart. She loved me when I was hard to love. She stayed when I didn't ask. She became the light I followed. The room fell silent. Then applause thundered. Julia cried openly. Richard stood tall, pride shining in his eyes. It wasn't just an art show. It was a testament to survival, to the bond of chosen family, and to the power of truth. As the night ended, Julia and Richard walked beside Luna, hand in hand, just as they had in her drawing years ago. But this time, she wasn't fragile or fading. She was strong, radiant, and full of life. Her past would always remain a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had turned her pain into something beautiful, a message of hope for others who still lived in silence. The little girl who once had only 3 months to live was now a woman whose story would live forever. And in that moment, Julia realized something powerful. What began as a job had become a calling. What began as survival had become love. And together, they had created not just a family, but a legacy.